Can I just say one thing firstly? I love the name Eat Sleep Boxing Repeat.
Welcome back to another edition of ESBR's Big Fight Breakdown in partnership with sharpbetting.co.uk. Um, as always, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, interact with our content any way you can. That'd be greatly appreciated. And in this one, we'll be discussing the big fight breakdown between Jaron Boots Ennis and Eimantas Stanionis in a welterweight title unification matchup on April 12th from the famed Atlantic City Boardwalk Hall in New Jersey. Um, Danny, Owen, thanks for joining. Owen, I'll start with you. What do you think of this matchup quickly? If you ask me, I think it's one of the most interesting matchups in the division in quite some time. What do you think of it?
Yeah, I think as we were talking off camera just before we started, I think welterweight is a very poor division. On the channel, myself and quite a few of the guys, we've all been quite heavily critical of middleweight. And the sort of the standard of champions, the depth in the division. But I think once you look past this fight, you look at the other champions. I think it's quite a poor division, especially to the casual. As we said off camera, no disrespect to Brian Norman Jr., but if you asked 100 people in the street, do they know who Brian Norman Jr. is? I'd imagine 96 of them are going to say no. So that to me sums it up. But this is a good fight. If Boots wins it, it's a case of what next for him because there isn't any other big names at welterweight really. In my opinion, were big enough to tempt Boots into a fight. So yeah, it's a good fight. It's probably like you say, it is the best fight in the division. But that's quite a damning verdict in my opinion. If this is the best fight in the division, from obviously Boots' perspective.
Yeah, I would have to agree with you, man. The division's been quite lackluster ever since Crawford and Spence.
Mhm.
But I do think that perhaps this one could change things and get things going again. Danny, what are your thoughts on the matchup, man?
Yeah, 100%. It's the best fight we saw at welterweight since obviously Crawford versus Spence, although that's not really saying much, is it? I think the matchups we've seen at the upper ends of welterweight have been disappointing. There just aren't the names there that, as Owen sort of alluded to, will attract the attention of your casual sports fan. But this is, on paper, you'd probably say the two best in the division. Certainly most people seem to regard Boots Ennis as the best fighter and Stanionis is the number two. Although it's hard to say that, for sure when none of the champions have fought each other and their resumes, no one resume really stands out. But to the eye test, you would say these are the best two, and I am looking forward to it. I think it's a very competitive fight, and we'll get into that in a bit more detail later on, perhaps. And yeah, I mean, it's in terms of the numbers, it's going to attract. I don't think it's going to be breaking any records. They're two, even though they're probably the two best fighters, maybe the two biggest names, two of the biggest names in the division. They're not massive names, either of them. But I am looking forward to it as a boxing fan, absolutely.
Yeah, me too. Not the most scintillating matchup for unification, but I'll take it. I think it's a great one personally. And before our recording, I've noticed that our guys over at Sharp Betting have Boots as a 1.18 favorite. In other words, he's a 9/50 favorite to win. Honestly, like if you ask me, I think those are a little bit wide. I think that this is a perhaps a more even matchup than those odds suggest. Danny, I'll stick with you. What do you think of those odds, man? Do you think they're
Yeah,
too wide? Do you think they're on the money? Or do you think that they should be even wider for Ennis?
no, I think they're very wide. I agree with you, Thomas. I think I've really gone off Boots Ennis in his last couple of fights, to be honest. I mean, he drew a lot of criticism for the performance in his rematch with Chikadze, and rightly so. But I wasn't even particularly impressed with the way he dealt with David Avanesian. Yes, he won every round and stopped him, but it was a faded Avanesian coming off the back of a brutal stoppage loss to Terence Crawford, and he shipped so many shots in that fight, and he shipped so many shots against Chikadzian in the rematch as well. That was a very competitive fight. Um, in saying that, he's been a lot more active than Stanionis. He's the bigger name. He's the home fighter. He's the A side. So the odds can sometimes be wider than based on pure sport merit off that. But I think Stanionis is going to cause him a lot of trouble. I think you'd have to make Boots the favourite. But
Mhm.
you know what, 1.18, that's like between in the UK odds 1 to 5 and 1 to 6. I don't see that at all. No way. I think it's maybe a 55-45, 60-40 fight for me. I mean, in terms of the resumes, I don't see a great deal in splitting them. In the eye test, I actually think Stanionis has looked better. I don't think he's brought out the red flags to me that Boots Ennis has in his last two fights. And yeah, I see it a lot closer than the odds makers, definitely.
That's a great point. And I definitely agree with you there. In Boots' last fight against Chakhudzian, and even against Avanesian as well. I mean, he gets hit. He's not really a defensive master in there.
Nope.
Very skilled, but he definitely gets hit. And Stanionis is a guy who brings the pressure. So, and he can take a punch. So, it's going to be a tough one. And I was quite surprised upon seeing those odds myself. But perhaps they'll even up a little bit more as the date gets closer, April 12th. Danny, or I'm sorry, Owen, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I completely agree with everything Danny said. To even touch on his previous performances when he obviously knocked out Roman Villa then went on to get knocked out by Ricardo Rodriguez in 3 rounds. So Boots taking 10 rounds to get him out hasn't exactly aged very well. For the fight following when he got chinned inside 3 rounds. So I think Eddie Hearn has probably done a good job of promoting Boots to be bigger than he actually is at present. Um, Obviously, he's a good fighter. He's a top level fighter, but Eddie Hearn would have you believe he's got that star power, that level to be the elite within boxing. And perfectly, Danny described it. His performances haven't been as good as he's been. He hasn't been anywhere near what he's been promoted to be. So I think it's interesting. I think the odds are way too wide. I think Stanionis is going to cause him a lot of problems, and this is almost a bit of an acid test, I think, for Boots, because it's the division isn't, as we said, it's not exactly stacked. So at the moment for Boots Ennis, it's high risk, low reward, in my opinion, because if he wins this, a lot of people are just going to say, well, he should have been winning it anyway. He's the best in the division. If he loses it, it brings up questions. So I think the odds are too wide. I think 60-40, as Danny said, is probably about right. Maybe even the 55-45, to be honest. But yeah, I think those odds are wide, and I do think this is a bit of an acid test for Boots Ennis.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm not a betting man because unfortunately betting is illegal here in California. But if I were, I definitely see uh Stanionis as a live dog here. And
Mhm.
it definitely might be worth putting some money on him ahead of this one. Um, but I'm curious to see what the winner does next. Um, do you, Owen, I'll stick with you. What path forward do you see for the winner of this fight? Um, either way.
Mhm. I think if Stanionis gets the upset, it's going to be an immediate rematch. I'd be lying if I said I wouldn't think that'd happen. And to be honest, there's no way it doesn't happen. I think if Boots Ennis wins it, I think he's got to go try and go undisputed. As you know, I've mentioned Mario Barrios, WBC, and Brian Norman Jr., WBO. On paper, you'd have him favourite for both of those fights, pre-Stanionis fight. So I think for Boots Ennis, it's Eddie Hearn's promoting him as this sort of massive star power. I think he's got to go and secure undisputed status to even get close to doing that. But I think if Stanionis wins, we'll be looking at an immediate rematch, and then possibly even a trilogy. depending on how that goes. But yeah, I think Boots Ennis as the favourite, I think it's got to be to try and go undisputed. It's the division's there for the taking for him, so I think if he doesn't attempt to do so, and Eddie Hearn doesn't negotiate those fights for him, I think it's a stupid move, to be honest.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think that unifications, especially in this division where there's just isn't a lot of interest, I think that's the way to go. Um, Although I think it is like worth noting that we got four fighters coming up that will be competing on May 2nd to 147. That could make things interesting. You got Brian Garcia and Rolly Romero and
Mhm.
uh, sorry, Devin Haney and Jose Ramirez. All four of those guys moving up to 147. So perhaps they could factor in the future. Danny, what do you think would be ahead for the winner in this one?
I actually see it slightly differently. I think, regardless of the outcome, Boots Ennis will move up to 154. He's mentioned being tight at the weight a couple of times. He even said, him and Eddie, that they would consider a move up to 154 following the second fight against Chikadzian. Maybe that's trying to paper over the cracks of a subpar performance, not
Mhm.
beyond the realms of possibility. However, I think if he loses, he'll move up because you can then say, "Oh, I lost because I'm dead at the weight X, Y, and Z." And if he wins, I don't see any of those potential unifications or undisputed fights as big fights. The big fights are up at 154. There's been talk of this fight against Virgil Ortiz Jr. That's a much bigger fight than any of the unifications against any of the two other champions at 147. Even a fight against Fundora, I know he's more on the PBC side of things, is a bigger fight again. So that's the way I sort of see Boots going. I think it's more likely if Stanionis wins, you'll see potentially. Obviously, Barrios has got that WBC title. He's with PBC, like Stanionis. That's a matchup you think's ready made. I think it's a fairly not comfortable, but it's a fight you'd make Stanionis a big favourite in, judging how much Barrios struggled against Jesus Ramos last time out. But I think Boots will move up. I think it's a good point you make, Thomas, on the well, we don't know if it's going to be a long lasting thing, but obviously Haney and Garcia both up at
Mhm.
147, but they're on a collision course with each other. Is Butch going to wait about for a year, 18 months to maybe get the winner of that? Obviously, a Ryan Garcia fight would be a mega fight, but you're going into real if buts and maybes if that's ever materializing. So I think Butch will move up, win or lose next month.
Yeah, absolutely. Lots of possibilities for, I mean, this is Boots Stanionis is according to us, it's a solid matchup and Boots could be in deep in this one. So without further ado, we'll get into final predictions here. Danny, how do you think this is going to go down, man?
I think gun to my head, not going on what I'm potentially going to bet on and the odds and stuff, I would favour Boots to win a close, competitive, maybe contentious decision. I just think the inactivity for Stanionis is something you have to consider. I mean, it's going to be almost a year since his last fight, and before that, it was over 2 years, whereas Boots has been much more active. Stanionis has probably got the better jab, but Boots sort of throws a wider array of shots, more eye-catching shots. I don't think either of them are a one-punch knockout artist. Boots has actually shown a really good chin as well, to be fair, as is Stanionis. And I just think Boots being the A side, the home fighter, probably the more talented fighter. I know we've been a bit sore on Boots, but he is a very talented fighter. He's a more naturally talented fighter than Stanionis. I think if he's knuckled down, treats this fight with the seriousness it deserves and merits, I think he'll come out on top in a competitive, good to watch fight. But if I was putting a
Absolutely.
bet on, you've got to be with Stanionis for sure.
Great points, great points. Owen, how do you think this is going to go down, man?
Yeah, I agree with Danny. I think Boots will get a points victory. I'd be very surprised if either man gets a knockout. I think if we do, it'll be a highlight reel, either punch that causes a barrage of follow-up shots and a stoppage, or a sort of a punch from the gods, one punch knockout type thing. I think Stanionis is going to take it to Boots. I think he's going to make it not necessarily messy. But try and stop Boots getting into a flow. So I think it could be quite scrappy affair at times. But I think Boots, like as Danny said, naturally the more skillful fighter. I think he'll have enough to get it done. But I agree with Danny. If I was putting a bet on the night, I would be putting Stanionis in an knockout, definitely.
Yeah, I hate to be boring, but yes, I'm also going with Boots by decision. I think it will be a competitive fight. I see like a 8-4, 7-5 scorecard at the end. Um, yeah, the good points about the inactivity from Stanionis. Been quite inactive. Um, al although, in his last fight, after the 2-year layoff, he did look pretty sharp,
Yep.
but yeah, he's facing a different level here, so we'll see how that goes. But yeah, I'm feel pretty confident that Boots will pull it out by decision. So there you have it. April 12th, the big fight between Eimantas Stanionis and Jaron Boots Ennis. They'll be unifying the WBA and IBF titles. We'll see how that goes down. Please comment, let us know. How do you think it's going to go down, and what do you think the winner will do next? Danny, Owen, thank you guys for joining, and we'll catch you on the next one.
Cheers, mate.